I think we should move to this. And I do kind of, I don't necessarily want to show examples because I think that might confuse us right now, but I do want to talk a little bit for a second. And Matthew, I wonder if I can put you in the hot seat on this so you can tell me if this isn't a good idea, but I'll channel you for a minute. So here's the frame up. So we all know that when we're doing really good work as leaders of strategy, we're not only working in setting the organizational direction, but we're also working on culture. We know that. We did a collab last month on culture. We could do a whole year on culture. We could do a whole century on culture. And we know that culture eats strategy for lunch, right? That is a truism. And so one of the things that I think is really interesting is we end up making a lot of lists in all of our planning and strategy work, right? There's like the list of goals and there's a list of values and there's the list of guiding principles and there's always lists. And that can be a little bit, it can like be overwhelming in its own right. And one of the lists is team norms and working agreements. And, as part of our classic strategic planning process, we're always, values are in there somewhere, right? Also in the mix on this would be beliefs and behaviors. And then team norms and working agreements are a little bit different than that, actually. They intend for different things. And so I'm just wondering, the specific question I would be fun to talk about would be, has anybody had experience with sense making of having all of these things, connecting these things, choosing to use some of these and not others? And Matthew, you're off mute, and I know this is near and dear to your heart. So maybe you could start the conversation for us.
Yeah, I'm actually going to call back to what Timothy said. One of the biggest parts of a team working agreement, team norms is, well, okay, how do we talk to each other? How do we communicate? What methods work best for each person? And to kind of go beyond the, all right, send out a survey, what have you, because we're talking about an actual team that has back and forth communication. Just because it works well for you, Erica, to receive something in long form email, well, that doesn't mean that it's easy for me to communicate that way. Maybe we're introducing a huge drag point by having that be the standard way of communicating. So yeah, just how the team communicates with each other and what information gets communicated. I mean, we all know the people who like their status updates, every morning verbally so that they can immediately forget about them, versus those that like it in a dashboard so it's durable. That's one of the places that I like to start. How do we talk?
So Matthew, let's unpack this a little bit more. And again, I would ask anybody else to jump in as well. And so let's agree that we're going to use our standard definition that comes as part of your classic set of strategic planning work, which is mission, vision, values, right? And I always say, because it has alliteration, we just throw values in there, like it's just like, on the way from mission to vision. But it really isn't, right? Like values are kind of it's really it's not, right? It's much deeper than that. So let's agree that values answer the question how we will behave organizationally across the organization. And let's agree that team norms or working agreements are a little bit more in terms of how we will work, how we communicate, how we expect to operate as a member of a team. Matthew, would you agree with those definitions or any clarifications to add to?
Those definitions are great.
Okay, and I'm asking you just a little bit because I know you've done a lot of work in this. Any experience that you've had with people being confused with like values and team norms, or have you connected them, or have you done anything to reduce any confusion that might be inherent in these
Um,
two items?
one of these days I'll speak to a group of people that have the same understanding of what words mean. It hasn't happened yet, maybe someday. I feel like I saw a research paper recently about how shockingly different our understandings of common everyday words are. And
Hmm.
that's what's going to happen every single time. It the process of building these norms is at its core just, hey, how are we defining these different things? It's
That's a good point to actually an obvious point and a really good one to add to the mix is starting with definitions. Sorry to add to your comment.
Oh yeah, no, please do. My challenge for the day is insomnia. So if I start rambling, feel free to interrupt me with something more succinct and articulate.
A question for you, one last question. You're in good company with the insomnia. One last question for you, and I would look for other thoughts on this too. It looks like Brian has a question as well, is have you incorporated the creation of team norms as a standard item in a strategic planning process?
Much like you have a strategy, whether you set it intentionally or not, you have team norms in a planning process, whether you set them or not. As facilitators, we are always setting norms at the beginning of a facilitation session. Whether we're explicitly calling them team working agreements or not is a separate question, but we're already doing that to a certain extent. To directly answer the question, I try to have an explicit setting every single time, no matter what, even if it's not allowed for in the agenda. Great, well, then it's going to be a very quick process in which I say like, hey, here are some norms. All right, anything else? Hey, let's revisit this if it's an issue so that it can come up organically. But yeah, no matter what, these things exist. Set them purposefully so that you can leverage them purposefully.
I like it. Okay, so that's a really good point. So just to comment for a minute, we are as facilitators always creating, most of the time, ground rules, guiding, discussion guidelines, group norms, and sometimes that's the first time the group that we've worked with is actually doing those things. And it is cool to think about the idea that those would maybe be some standards that the group can take forward outside of our specific work with a group. And, groups are progressing as groups all of the time, and we're just part of that process. I always like to take that on board. So I think that's cool, Matthew. I think that's absolutely correct. There's a couple other questions in chat here too. And right, Tommy's just saying, we're absolutely add some applications of values and corresponding definitions. So I think that's always a really good, really, really good key takeaway as well. And then Brian, you asked a specific question on any views on team charters, disc profiles, and inner team SLAs. What's interesting about that is our work always touches on some really deep culture work, and it really, really matters. And sometimes you wonder, like, well, should you go off and do that? Because you got to do that before you do the strategy work. So does anybody have any specific thoughts or feedback on Brian's point, which was team charters, disc profiles, inner team SLAs? Good, bad, or ugly?
I just sent something in. I use team charters all the time just to maintain the scope because scope creep happens so much. But when I defined each member's role in there, part of that is to clearly mark that when they do not understand something or they feel that they are not getting the communication they need, that they are to ask. I can't know that for you, and that's part of what we kind of talk about in the initial meeting is that I don't know what everybody's thinking. I don't know what you're understanding, what you're not understanding. Yeah, you have some facial expressions and so forth, but if I'm not sitting right in front of you, I'm not going to catch that. So it's up to you, and it's your responsibility to ask and not wait until you're so lost or off topic that it's hard to pull you back in.
Yeah, that's right. And I thank you, Taffy. I think that's totally right on. And so maybe the genesis of this conversation a little bit, and there's some other thoughts on here too, as well. So just watching our Zoom chat as well as our conversation is, stating the fact that it's possible and maybe likely that our work with an executive team or a leadership team needs to start at the place of team norms, because perhaps those are not well enough established yet to do the good work that is required to do strategic thinking and strategic planning work. And that does require a safe space to ask hard questions. That's right, Matthew. Totally agree with that. Sometimes we assume that the team norms are in place, and then we realize that the team's not functioning well. We're not able to have those advanced conversations because we haven't established how we're going to work together as a team. I just went through that experience myself with a particular leadership team, and we spent the first 2 months trying to figure out how to work together. And we've been trying to get to, planning the organization, but, if that foundation isn't there, you can't do work on building the business, right, or building the organization. And so, right, so Brian, just adding to Jim's point, meeting guidelines, not only how we behave, meeting guidelines would be another way to say team norms, group norms, that type of thing. So, okay, so interesting conversation in that regard, and I just wanted to bring that up because sometimes being really explicit about how all these pieces work together. And I really like that idea of bringing to our forefront some attention on how the group is working. That is our group that is intended to be our planning and strategy team. So, yep, and I think that's really true. I think that's really true, Taffy. The expert from afar that's not in the organization can ask these tough questions. And we should do that. If we are external facilitators, we should step into that space. That's our job to do so. Absolutely. So, and then Jim's just commenting, really love that as well. Not only being clear about team norms, but actually being clear about where organizations are going at the beginning of any governance meeting, in this case, a school board meeting, mission, vision, values. I love that. I think that's absolutely correct. Fantastic.